Okay, good evening. Welcome to the latest version of Building the Scottish State with myself, Dr. Mark McNaught, here on the 35th of March, 2022. And I have the great pleasure to have with me once again, David Henry, who is a candidate for an Alba candidate for the Edinburgh City Council. And first of all, thanks, David, for being with me again. Short notice when I couldn't find less interesting guests.
Ha ha ha. Actually, I heard it's because you'd run out of money. That's what I heard.
Yeah, it costs so much to run this show, anyway. But anyway, so you're campaigning for the Edinburgh Council. Tell us about it. What's it like? I mean, I know that
I just laugh because at the weekend we had a sort of, what would you call it, a fringe event with the Electoral Commission through in Glasgow. And they were talking about...
At the Alba conference.
Yeah. And
yes.
So obviously I've been through this before, but not for myself, but for people inside the SNP. So I know what most of the rules are, but they said, your official spending starts when you first declared you were standing as a candidate and when you started campaigning, and it was basically the 24th of March is the date that it starts. So now everything that you do and spend has to be accounted for. I thought, I've been out since January. I've been doing street stalls, leafleting, out speaking to people, even in the freezing cold in January. Mm-hmm. So now the weather's brightened up a bit, thank goodness. But so it made me laugh that they were talking about, that'll be the 24th of March. But actually, I started in January. But that's before the regulated period. So very interesting weekend. Obviously, the Alba conference, lots of things coming out of it, which is great. And I think we live in very interesting times. And our SSRG group, my God, we're coming into our own after we're just over a year old now, I think.
I know, just a little over, I think, a year and 2 months, something like that. We began at the beginning of last year in late 2020, early 2021. So I think we made some things happen, and so just to keep people up to date on our progress, Sarah Salyers who is a member of the SSRG. She wrote a long list of several. About 5 or 6 articles that was published in Ian Lawson's blog, Yours for Scotland, which made the case that basically Scotland has had a written constitution since the Treaty of Union was adopted, and basically she making the argument that the claim of right of 1689 is basically a prenuptial agreement for the Treaty of Union, and that it basically said it was a condition for the adoption of the Treaty of Union was the inclusion of the claim of right in it, so that basically Scots had a prenuptial, and they can bail if they want from the Union at any time. And so, this history has been, as we say, unearthing it, or I think she used the word excavated, these documents, and to see what they really mean. But it does, but in combination, they do specify that Scotland has the right is sovereign, has the right to depose an unjust government, and as part of the Treaty of Union, the UK is not to interfere in laws, and it's not to change its constitution without its consent, which has been done innumerable times. Does that pretty much summarize her?
Yeah, argument? That's pretty good. It sounds like you've been practicing. I mean, the funny thing is, I've got another friend here in Edinburgh, Pat, who's in the party, and she went up to the National Library in Edinburgh and asked and arranged for me to come and see their archived copy of the Treaty of Union. Because if you remember, we were concerned that there seemed to be no official version available. That's why SSRG published the Treaty of Union, so that people could read it for themselves. And we were concerned that perhaps what we had wasn't the official wording. Well, it is, because I've taken pictures. I got permission to take pictures of this little copy of the document they've got there. Did that, but also there was a document uncovered which we discovered in, I think it's the Crawford I'm terrible for details. I remember details, not that they're any good to anybody else. But Crawford, I think it's M195, right? So you can go and look it up yourself and request it. Now, I wasn't allowed to take a
Sorry,
picture.
what does Crawford refer to?
Well, this is, I think it's Lord Crawford and their library, I think archive that's actually held at the public library, at the National Library. So this one document was really fascinating, and I sent it to Sarah because it gave an indication of what was happening with the Kirk, which of course was the previous government back in 1707. And here's this, there's one little page, and it details that they're having this meeting prior to the Scottish Parliament being closed. It's going to be closed for 7 days to consider the treaty by the MPs. This is in Edinburgh in 1707, before we entered the treaty with England. And their concern is they didn't want the other side to be able to change things after it was signed without them having effectively a veto. So it didn't pass straight away. It tells you this in the detail because it's a minute basically of what happened at the meeting, some extra discussion, some other amendments, and then it was agreed, proposed, seconded, and voted for, and it became a condition of Scotland entering the Treaty of Union that it could never be changed without Scotland's permission. Mm-hmm. In other words, Scotland's got a veto. And what I then found, which was, again, you can find it online, was when you look up the articles, because that's the very reason that we published the Treaty of Union. We couldn't find the Treaty of Union last year online. Every time you typed in Treaty of Union, you got bounced via Google to the articles. Anyway, there's a Scottish Act and also one in England. Interesting, in 1991, the Treaty of Union (Scotland) Act was radically changed. Now, in 1991, it was because the UK was signing the EU Maastricht Treaty.
Yes, yes.
Anyway, so and you should see the preamble at the details at the bottom of this, why they were radically changing the treaty without our permission. We never had a referendum. We didn't have a vote on it. Nobody got asked. And it's royal prerogative. It's Her Majesty and the Crown who does not need to ask for permission from anybody as blah, blah. No. That's in England. That is not in Scotland. Mm-hmm. So it's quite clear the Treaty of Union was massively breached in 1991. And then again, it's been breached a second time very clearly in Brexit.
Yeah, in the Internal Markets Act, yes, that radically changes the legal system.
But the Brexit agreement. So when they had Article 50 giving notice, they clearly breached our treaty again because Scotland had a veto and has a veto. It cannot be bullied or pushed around from England, from Westminster. They have no say. They have to come back to the people of Scotland and ask, and they never did, and they never have. Mm-hmm. And Brexit breached that. 62%. You can quite clearly see it. We had this vote. It was not a British vote. There's no such thing. There's no such thing as the British people. There's the people of the four nations. No. And Scotland's had a vote just like England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And 62% of the people who took part in that referendum voted Remain. So England cannot take Scotland out of the EU against its will. We had a veto, and that should have been respected, and it hasn't been. So all these facts and history are there. And what I think Sarah did, I have to say her speech was amazing. I sat there, I was really anxious because obviously the implication of asking for a remit back of what is your first motion at a conference means.
What specifically does that mean? Remit back. What does that mean?
Well, the remit back says we want you to vote to basically suspend this motion, i.e., not vote for it. Mm-hmm. Send it back to conference, the conference committee, and make it come back again with an amendment. And then so the amendment hadn't been allowed because it was quite off topic.
And specifically, the amendment was regarding using this mechanism.
Yes, well, it was basically about trying to get them to confirm Scottish sovereignty, etc. Which there's nothing. I don't think many people disagree with that, but that's not the correct procedure to do that in it should have been perhaps a motion in its own right,
Mhm.
And the spring conference, if we're following what used to happen in the SNP, which I think we are to a certain degree, spring conference is not the main conference of the year. The main one that makes big policy decisions for the party is the autumn one. And so the right place for that should be the autumn conference. So let's hope that's exactly what happens, that a well thought through motion makes it to the autumn conference for the party to decide if this is what they want to adopt as Alba policy. So I suspect that is what's now going to happen. There'll be internal discussions. People, we might have an assembly, or it could go to National Council recommending it and then going. Anyway, let's see what happens. I think it was well received. It was very clear. There was a lot of support in the room. I mean, you've probably watched it, like many of your viewers, online. It's available on YouTube, and it was a very professionally run. Apart from my speech, which wasn't very professional, but it was entertaining. And there's a lesson actually. I helped Abu Meron, right, our other candidate, who brought up the whole concept of a motion on protecting New Scots citizenship because it's under threat from the Westminster government. So I helped him draft the motion as I'm secretary of the branch and submitted it. I then went over and helped him with his speech and helped him time it so it would be 3 minutes and gave him some pointers. Only I forgot to time my own. So mine ran over quite a bit. But it passed. It had a lot of support. We had lots of speakers speaking in favour of it. And I think it's really telling that the Alba Party has a policy where we protect people's human rights and citizenship. We also protected women and girls' safe spaces. I thought it was a very positive conference.
Good.
It's good to have these discussions and debates. I mean, even when people are getting up there and asking for a remit back or amending things, well, that means you get a debate. That means you hear people that don't all necessarily agree on every detail. So I happen to think it went very well. It was well attended. I think there was about 400 people there.
Okay, good. Where was it located? Where was it held?
It was apparently some place which they hold football matches in called Hampden Park, which I've never been to.
You filled the stadium. Apparently, that's a really big stadium. But
it was quite a big stadium, and the sunshine was glorious. So it was a shame to be inside. Because outside it was gorgeous and about 17 degrees and sunshine. It was beautiful. And unlike now, we've had hailstones today in Edinburgh. It's freezing cold. It just shows you how quick the weather can change.
We got some. I got a little bit of hail today riding my bike back from work. So it's.
We've had that too. Yeah, hail. Yeah.
Anyway, so I'd like to get on now to the way and from the question, what are the odds of a concerted indie push? Claim of right, broken treaty, Section 30, and we're in the process of producing a video with the SSRG. I know you've been busy, so you haven't had the time to complete it. But with 6 different routes to independence, and
I've got the scripts here.
Okay,
I never wrote them, but at some point I've got to find the time to record them. Yeah.
Well, why don't you just go through each of them quickly, and just what the different options are.
So as we all know, because they've never stopped talking about it for the last 7 years, there's one route which is asking Westminster for a Section 30 under the Scotland Act to have a referendum, like they did back in 2014. Well, in fact, 2012, I think they had
that's when it was signed. Yeah.
So, and that's where that has come from. However, things have changed quite dramatically since then, including we're no longer in the EU, we've had Brexit, all these things. So Section 30, but the problem with Section 30 is it means you've given up your sovereignty. It means you don't accept that Scotland's got a written constitution or has any right to anything without the other side agreeing to it. And that makes no sense. Also, what do you do if that's what you actually believe as a government, let's say, that you have to get permission, otherwise it's not legitimate. So you go down the Section 30 route. What if the other side just refuses to give you a Section 30? In which case you're then in catch 22.
Yeah. And Glenn, as I understand it, Gordon Ross had contacted Mike Russell. Mike Russell apparently explained what they would be doing, and they would be passing the legislation, and they would just be, steaming on ahead, full steam ahead with it, and kind of daring the UK government to stop it. I mean, that's basically what. So that would be in the context of doing it without a Section 30 order, which also could be very problematic.
But that brings another problem. So that's a referendum without Section 30, without permission, in other words. Sounds great. So you go to court and you fight it. So that what happens if the other side, your unionist opposition, decides to down tools and tell all their people not to vote in it? Then you have no legitimate referendum because the result is going to be tainted. So you're then so you're in catch-22. So that's the first two, both a referendum. Incidentally, as we know in SSRG, the experts, legal experts and academic experts that we've had at most of our meetings have all told us that hardly any country has ever gained independence by using a referendum in the first place. And ones that did have a vote, a specific vote on gaining independence, they had a different franchise. So
yes, I was going to get to that because
meant people not born in that country did not get a say in the country's independence. It was people who were born there, So there is a legitimate question whether or not if you held a referendum and yet you kept the same franchise.
Yeah, because in the 2014 it was the local franchise and so people with second homes, anybody that registered could vote, and so that based on the local franchise. And I live in France, and I'm still a UK citizen. When I was when the UK was in the EU, I could vote in local elections and European elections, but I could not vote in any referendums or presidential or legislative elections. And then I understand that I'm not a citizen, but with Scotland, it's obviously different because people are UK citizens, but you would think that there would need to be, careful evaluation of the franchise so that people who were genuinely, long-term residents, I mean, where they were born doesn't matter, but they are long-term residents that have come to stay and work and live in Scotland, and not, for example, the UK army that's based here in Scotland or second homeowners, et cetera, et cetera. So I mean, this would need to be done very, very carefully. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the issue. So if you're going to question or open up the question of the franchise for a future referendum, and there is legitimate reasons for doing that, to make it fairer. I mean, you can't put it this way, to take it one extreme. If somebody moves to Scotland, let's say from the south of England, just 6 months before the referendum, why should they have a say in the future constitutional future of Scotland? So I do think there's a legitimate question. However, I also think it has to be fair. And so I think if somebody's lived here, let's say for 20 years and paid taxes and contributed to Scotland's society, then they should have a say in Scotland's future. I think that sounds fair to me. But certainly there's so that's a question that needs to be answered, and people have to legitimately engage in that process. So that's one. So that's two of them, both a referendum. The third one is just to use a democratic vote, such as the next general election, when hopefully Boris is going to leave with his friends and all his piles of cash that he's made out of out of the COVID situation, and he leaves, and we end up with another general election. That could be a much clearer process to have a plebiscite election where one of the parties, at least, I'm beginning to guess which one that might be, would stand on a ticket that says, "You vote for us, we will deliver it urgently. That is our number one priority. You vote for them, they get the maximum number of seats or a clear majority, they get a majority of the votes. The Scottish nation have therefore, and the voters, have democratically expressed their will." That would be accepted internationally because it's, it also reduces the risk of the other side deciding we're not going to play this game and we don't want our people to vote, in which case you're not going to have any representation. So that's a third way of doing it, the plebiscite election. The fourth way, and I'm trying to think what the fourth, fifth, and sixth ones are.
Well, there was a decolonization that
Right.
Alfred has proposed.
Yes.
The manifesto for Indy and
and then the decolonization and then there was the forgotten, effectively what Sarah has uncovered and so spectacularly described, which is that we actually have a written constitution, and if, of course, Westminster government has become illegitimate in Scotland because it has breached our right, for instance, our legal right to protest is embedded in the claim of right, therefore Westminster becomes illegitimate. That's when you need to call back in a convention, which must represent all the different sections of society. And that is when it's the convention that turns round and effectively fires your politicians because they have not represented the people and they haven't protected their rights. So that's one of the other routes. But that then means you may have to go to court, which would be the Court of Session, because that is Scotland's highest court. I just find it quite amazing that even some of our most senior learned legal minds in Scotland don't seem to be aware of Scotland's written constitution and what in fact effectively Sarah uncovered through our research. You know, we all knew about the Treaty of Union and it was linked to the claim of right. And then I've even seen people online from the other side claiming the claim of right has no relevance these days. Well, it was passed again and supported in July 2018 in the House of Commons. So it clearly does. It's still, that's quite recently.
Very much still alive, yes.
Yes, it is. I just don't think many people really paid that much attention to it. If you were a betting person, I would say the most likely way of succeeding and gaining independence in a democratic process and doing it fairly quickly, because let's face it, Scotland's being damaged by Brexit Britain all the time, is to go down the route of a plebiscite election. That seems to solve an awful lot of the problems. You don't need to go to court and ask the court's permission. You don't need referendum. You don't need to ask the Electoral Commission. It's quite clear that would satisfy international experts, and you only need one other sovereign country to agree that is it. You're hereby an independent nation. Then you've got all the work to do. And of course, what we've been doing, Mark, as you know, in SSRG, isn't just talking about the simple question of how do we get independence. In fact,
well, not so simple sometimes, but yes.
Yes, we thought. I mean, this is more than a year ago now when we came up with the Manifesto for India, and it was a 10-point plan, not an 11-point one that was written on a fag packet and disappeared very quickly afterwards. The fact is, clear steps need to be taken. Things need to be thought about. I mean, I've got two things here. So you asked about the thing. I've got this right now, 600 pages of it. It's probably far too detailed for most people to even bother reading it. Let alone, it was more of, if you like, a sitting government's idea of what a future Scotland is. I'm very pleased to say I've got one of these, which I got at the weekend, which is they're doing launches all over the country. It's very similar to what Wings Over Scotland did back in 2014.
Well, I know Stuart Campbell participated in its redaction. So
yes, there's quite a few experts input.
Robert McAlpine, Jim Sillers, a couple others. So
yep. So it's not one person. I always think when it's not one person's point of view that's written down, it's much better, because
I think we found that in our work. Certainly, I mean,
we have
nothing like a few nothing like more than one brain working on it. I mean,
well, indeed, because you get more of a consensus and you get less extremes. I mean, when I start hearing some people giving you their opinion on currency, for instance, and how the EU will collapse in any moment, the euro is going to collapse. Well, it's not going to collapse, and it probably never will, because you've got the largest European economy at the heart of it, and that's Germany. So it's not going to collapse. The pound might.
Especially if Scotland becomes independent, it sets up its own currency, and the British pound is no
let's
longer backed by petroleum.
Yeah, well, let's face it. I made a speech a few weeks ago through in Paisley on behalf of Alba to represent them. I was asked to go through, and the terrible thing is people are standing there talking to you before you're about to be called up because you're waiting in a line and you're about 2 more to go, and they're coming trying to talk to you. I'm trying to keep my head focused on what I want to be able to say. I had no speech written, which is very dangerous, but no speech written. But there was a couple of things I wanted to get across. One, I believe independence is clearly Scotland's best route from now on. Just look at the mess we're in now. Energy prices going through the roof, inflation going through the roof. You know, I mean, how can someone in a normal house with an ordinary job all of a sudden afford their electricity bill going from about £800 a year, gas and electric, about that, to £3,000? Where's the money coming from? Where's that extra £2,200 going to come from? What, they're going to get an increase in their salaries? No, they're not. And all the time, the UK government tells you the official inflation is about 7%. No, it's not. I'm very good because I cook my own food, and I have to because I'm gluten-free. So I don't eat many ready meals. I don't get takeaways because I never know what's in them. So I know the price of everything that I used to buy. Everything has gone up, mostly between 20 and 30%.
Jeez.
So inflation plus the fuel prices and electricity and gas. Inflation for a lot of people is probably around 25% a year. Are they going to get 25% wage rise? No.
Kenny McCaskill was making this. Kenny McCaskill was making the same points on last night's The Nation Talk show with John Drummond. First of all, pointing out one of the comments. Yes, he was very scathing about the referendum route to independence and suggested what we've been suggesting because we've been working with Kenny on after the elections holding a convention to decide how to go forward. And what means to employ to achieve independence. And so, another comment I just want to go on quickly is what somebody said that we should join the EU. We agree, but not immediately. We've been in contact with the European Free Trade Association, and we did that prior to the last year's Holyrood elections, and asking them if they used if the Scotland used the elections in May to be a plebiscite election, would they consider that legitimate in terms of for joining EFTA? And they said, but you got to do it, and we put that forward. We made our views clear, but that was not to be. So once Scotland does, have all Scotland really needs to join EFTA is the capacity to negotiate international treaties, which it can't technically now because it's part of the UK. The UK is the international actor, therefore they can't yet. But as soon as Scotland gets the capacity to negotiate international treaties, there's no problem. They don't have a solid definition of what constitutes a state. It doesn't necessarily have to be recognized by the UN, that type of thing. So
I think the important thing is, as we discovered, because I didn't know that much about EFTA, trying to get across to politicians that probably the most important part of the EU single market, of what we had before when we were in the EU, is actually the customs union.
Mm-hmm.
As has been proved, anyone who bothers to buy anything over a certain amount of money, and any business that wants to send stuff and sell it into the EU, what the EU was good about with its customs union is there was no customs. There was no checks. There was no duties. There was no paperwork. There was no agents agents needed. I've experienced, I've said this before, I've experience of going to the Geneva Motor Show, which of course is in Switzerland, which is not in the EU. And the amount of paperwork
it is in EFTA, but it's not in the EEA, crucially. And I believe that just very quickly, I believe that the other I'm not sure whether the Norway, Liechtenstein, and Iceland, I don't know whether they're in the customs union or not, But that doesn't mean that once Scotland is in the EEA, they cannot try to negotiate to get into the customs union as well. Turkey is in the customs union, but they're neither part of the EU nor EFTA. So it's all up just to be negotiated.
So,
it's not like, you have to do this if you do that. With EFTA, they would help us get Scotland get into the EEA, and then after that, it's like, okay, you can pick and choose what programs you want to take, participate in, and you can also petition, the candidate for EU membership, but not in a desperate situation of being out of the EEA and the single market. And then you can, Scotland could take its time, see with the EU, weigh, okay, do we want to stay in EFTA or join the EU? It can be done, as we say in French, tranquillement. Yeah,
that sounds very foreign.
Tranquilly.
I think what the EFTA route, which is what we've learned in SSRG, of course, is it can be done relatively quickly and painlessly.
Yeah.
And it gets you your first steps access back to the European single market. Now, I've seen others arguing, which of course is the SNP's policy, for instance, is they want to rejoin the EU. Well, that's not a simple process to do. According to some of the experts that are pushing that policy, it would take 4 to 5 years for Scotland to regain EU membership. Now, 4 to 5 years from now, how much damage do we think is going to have been inflicted on Scotland's economy?
How much more damage? Exactly.
We're already seeing fishermen and farmers complaining. I have to laugh because farmers, in the main, voted to leave the EU. Well, if you're hurting from it, it was a bad decision. The EU gave us access to a single market. It meant your cheese and your butter and all the other stuff that you moved out and sold and exported could move seamlessly and easily. And it's not so much that there was quotas or WTO rules to worry about. That wasn't the issue. The issue is you've got to have a customs agent. You've got to fill out all this paperwork, and it costs money and time. And then, of course, all the trucks get stopped and checked because there is a difference between the EU single market and what the UK is doing. Mm-hmm. This is the issue. And nobody, I think, the public, didn't really understand the complexities of what this is.
I didn't know all this stuff. I mean, I learned it as I was following it, but
I'll tell you what, I knew more than
Dominic. I'm sure you know more than I did, but
Dominic Raab, who was surprised to learn that 2,000 trucks went through Dover a day, and I thought,
is an important trade route.
I know, but if you've ever been to Dover, you can see them coming in and out, and hundreds of them, and and they didn't realize this was such an important link. You thought, oh my God. But you see, what Brexit proved is that you can basically tell the public anything you like, get them to vote a certain way, blame the EU. It's all the EU's fault. Get them to vote for it, very narrowly vote for it, by the way, and by just 2%. And yet that's the expressed will of the British people. What a load of rubbish.
And even though it was a non-binding referendum, and they didn't have if they didn't want to act on it.
Exactly. Not only that, there was 13.5 million voters that didn't bother to vote. The turnout wasn't actually that high. It was 76%, I think, across the UK. Now, in the Scotland's independence referendum in 2014, the turnout was 86%. It was huge. So there was a real voter engagement in the Scotland's referendum. There wasn't that much of an engagement in the UK's. Oh, and EU citizens that were living here didn't get a vote. Isn't that funny? There was several million that were excluded from it. So if we actually, so isn't it interesting that they want us to have a referendum and have to have a Section 30 if it's Scotland doing it. But if it's actually England that wants something, oh, well, we can exclude European citizens because they're not going to get a vote on the UK's future. Well, if that's fine at a UK level, then the same principle should be fine at a Scottish level. If you ask me.
Okay.
I think, I noticed somebody asked the question, why is gluten-free food so expensive? Well, I'll tell you why, because all the other food, which isn't gluten-free, is full of cheap produce, such as wheat. So they mass produce stuff. And if you ever look at what some of these things have got in them, you'd find that it's just crammed full of all this other stuff to fill it up. and that's cheaply produced. And unfortunately, it's more expensive and a smaller market for gluten-free stuff. So that's why it's so expensive, and that's why I know what everything costs.
So, moving on to the way in which independence is achieved. How do we go about declaring Indy without a referendum? So, assuming we eliminate the first two possibilities of Section 30 or non-Section 30 referendum, we're left, with our four scenarios of, and so what we've proposed is, after the conference, after the elections in May, that there be a conference held, and that we're basically planning for the end of July, to get people together from the S1P, from unions, from other, sectors of the.
Yes. Did you notice, by the way, Mark, the Alba had a big speaker, made a big speech from the RMT union.
I didn't see that.
Well, it was very interesting. It was good, and that tells me that there's obviously been lots of work behind the scenes going on, because, of course, Scotland's future isn't just for politicians to go around spouting about or offering a future. It's for every walk of life. All parts of Scottish society would be affected by it. Workers' rights, etc., would be affected by it. And therefore, it's absolutely right that the trade unions, community groups, special interests, groups, get the experts involved. So absolutely, a proper convention needs to represent all walks of life. And so what I think we already in the process, I noticed someone saying there was lots of people getting very depressed that nothing's been happening. Yeah, some of us are well aware nothing's been happening for quite a while. Hence why, and of course, I don't think anyone can claim that the S1P is urgently trying to deliver independence, because that's clearly not the case at all. I think they're actually now, not only have they left it too long and not done any work on it, I think they're actually afraid of it now. Mm-hmm. And whereas I think what's happening now with SSRG, but other groups as well, as you know, it's not just us.
Commonweal, there's lots of excellent groups. The Constitutional Commission, Constitution for Scotland, many other groups that have done excellent work, and that we want to take, and all which need to be taken on board when creating the future Scottish state. This is not an exclusive thing. This can't be an exclusive thing.
So to answer Julia's question there, should we be out demonstrate outside Holyrood and Bute House? No, I don't think we should. Don't think we should waste our time doing that.
I don't think it'll do any good. I
don't think. Anyway, they've passed laws that you could get arrested outside Holyrood because you're not allowed to even peaceful protest is under threat. So you're wasting your time doing that. The way to I think progress this fairly quickly is to join the road shows, get all the groups together. Make sure that your group or yourselves you've got delegates that are going to go to the conference that we're planning, which is non-partisan. So all parties will be invited. So will all the other groups. So will trade unions. So will lots of social groups. So that's the way to progress it, to get people thinking around the table. What sort of country do you want? I happen to think now more than ever, what's demonstrated perfectly. And that's what was part of my speech a few weeks ago. Scotland last year generated 97.5% of its electricity from wind. The cost of wind hasn't changed. It's exactly the same cost as it was last year and the year before that. So why?
And in the Pleistocene era as well.
Yeah, but why is it? Why in Scotland is our electricity bills going up? They're going up for a very simple reason. In England, they took the shortcut. Thatcher sold everything off. The utilities were privatized, and instead of them investing in the long term, because big companies tend to go for the quick profits short term.
They're not in the business of investing in the infrastructure.
No, what they did is convert their dirty, horrible coal-powered stations that used to burn coal to generate steam, to generate electricity, and they converted them to gas. Gas was much cheaper, and it produces less pollution and less CO2. So they ticked two boxes. They were becoming greener. Yes, but it was a short-term solution. And now the price of gas has gone through the roof. So guess what? That you're burning gas to generate electricity in England. It's gone up in price dramatically. So that's why our prices are going up. If Scotland had its own publicly owned energy company, we were generating our electricity from renewables like wind, our electricity prices wouldn't be changing at all.
Yeah.
That is clearly where Scotland should go. We should never be in a position where we've got OAPs and pensioners and people who are on benefits and the disabled who are now going to be faced with electricity and gas bills trebling in some cases.
It's crazy.
So they're either not going to switch on the heating and then end up with hypothermia. This is not a modern country. That's not how things are meant to happen. I mean, I noticed where you are in France, their electricity went up by 6%, but that's because most of it comes from nuclear power, which I happen to not think is the solution for us.
That's true. It's true, and even the gas. I have a contract with a gas provider. And as I understand, my prices. My rates haven't gone up because I'm under this contract. It may next year. I'm not sure. But also because France has a big stake in Électricité and Gaz de France. They can say, look, you're making less profits. Keep the prices down, and they can do that because they have much greater control. While it is there is, I believe, majority stake ownership by the French government in Électricité de France and Gaz de France. So they can say, you're making less profits as if and you need to keep the prices down. They can do that.
I tell you what, I'm afraid. I see somebody saying we should put the Labour Party to support a referendum. I don't think a referendum is the way to go, to be honest.
No.
I think plebiscite election is the way to go, but that's my personal view. Yeah. And what I like about SSRG is we do not, as a group, put out one view and say this is what we think the answer is. All we do is put out all the different routes. It's for others to decide and debate which one is the most likely. So on the Labour Party, well, certainly they should be putting pressure on the Labour Party to actually support Scottish democracy and stop being a unionist party, giving us orders from. I mean, here's a classic error that the Labour Party's done, and they've done it before. Their answer to our energy crisis is to have a one-off windfall tax. What? We're going to take the profits out. They're not fixing the problem. They're just covering them up. They're just painting over the problem. Which, I mean, if they'd really wanted to do something, the UK government should have, instead of allowing, because as of tomorrow, everyone's electricity goes through the roof. Which reminds me, I must go and, same on my gas, I must go and do a meter reading on my gas and submit it to British Gas. Because as of tomorrow, the cap goes up dramatically by, I think, 54%. And then there's apparently another 30-something% in the autumn. So you're more than doubling of your cost of gas. What should have happened if the UK government actually really cared about the British citizens is they should have lowered the cap. They should have said, no, we're going to fix this market. Because at the moment, you've got some of these energy companies making windfall profits because they're buying and selling, right? So they're making all this money at the expense of the ordinary family.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think
that simply can't afford it. That's going to drive more people into poverty. I mean, it's just it's criminal, or it should be criminal, but in the British state, it's not because they're criminal.
Yeah. So people should get their electricity and gas meter readings before midnight and submit them, because otherwise they could, from your last meter reading, which might have been 3 months ago, they're going to bill you at the new rate. So you can save hundreds of pounds right now by doing it tonight. And I saw that from somewhere, and I thought that's actually very good advice. Because otherwise they're going to bill you at the new rate for the last 3 months, even though the new rate only starts as of midnight tonight, or 1 minute past midnight. Anyway, so that's one way of doing it. I think the spell of thinking perhaps that a political party that's got lots of MPs, that's got lots of MSPs, that I'm afraid, even if you're a fan of that party, you cannot really believe that they've moved the progress of independence in the last 7 years, because they haven't. And there
was one person that said, I wonder what Nicola Sturgeon's big April announcement will be. I wasn't aware that there was supposed to be a big announcement.
Is it tomorrow on April Fool's Day, is it? Are we going to get another front page on the National saying Indie Ref is just around the corner? I mean, I don't know about you, but I used to like that newspaper. I now just see it as a running joke. There's been that many false dawns over the last 7 years. And so what they're going to go. So, I mean, if Mike Russell is got is what he's reported to have said is true, that they're going to hold a referendum no matter what, then they're going to end up in a court, and I can fairly sure I can predict the outcome. They will lose. The Scottish Parliament is not a real parliament. It's a devolved administration, right? And it's similar that people have brought up the issue of the GRA bill. The GRA bill will ultimately be overturned because, again, it's being created by a devolved parliament that does not have all the legal powers and sovereign powers. And in fact, they can't claim they do because they've already admitted that they want to go for a Section 30. So they've admitted that they need permission from Westminster. Now, the reason why the GRA bill will fail is because they are trying to rewrite and redescribe what a woman is. And that is clearly, sex is protected as one of the 9 characteristics in the Equality Act. The Equality Act comes from Westminster. The GRA bill comes from a devolved administration. A devolved administration can't rewrite Westminster's laws. It's not even legally competent to do that. So I think
they have to get royal assent as well.
And even if they get the royal assent, someone is going to take it to court, just like they did before, and it will be deemed that they are trying to rewrite UK legislation from a devolved parliament, and they can't. In fact, under the Scotland Act, only powers that have been granted to them, if you like, handed down. And this is always the problem with a devolved parliament,
or the 13 colonies in the United States that objected to exactly the same thing, that they were rewriting their colonial charters or what was basically their constitution at the time, and they just said enough. And then so when the 13 colonies became independent, they wrote their own constitutions, and then all of the new states that were admitted wrote their own constitutions and submitted it to the Congress for approval. But they wrote it; they designed their own government. They didn't have it, micromanaged and designed by Westminster.
I remember a simple example of this, but a much lower scale, was an SNP branch that was pretty radical, actually. Not my one, I have to say. I would never dream of being radical. Well, maybe. On certain things. Anyway, I heard through the grapevine that this particular branch decided to rewrite their constitution and remove the voting rights of certain people that had been elected. And they proposed it and seconded it and voted for it, and then wrote it up and said, well, except they didn't have the power to do that from the party. They couldn't write their own constitution, which is what they were doing. So this is a similar thing. So I think they've wasted a lot of time on a GRA bill, which was already covered mostly by the Equality Act anyway. But what it does do is highlight the limitations of a devolved administration. Powers devolved means powers are retained by the group that devolved them. And that's the issue. And we've heard this from constitutional experts as well, that the Scottish Parliament is not a legitimate parliament. Nicola Sturgeon, with all
it's a colonial administrative arm of the British state that happens to have an elected officials, but who are very limited or kept on a very, very short constitutional leash.
And a limited budget, which they have no real control over. I suppose one of the upsides of this is Scotland doesn't have any debt. I mean, how many times have somebody spoken to me and said, oh, how could you possibly survive? Where would the money come from? People have been brainwashed by the British state and a certain broadcaster with the letter B in it, repeatedly, by claiming that somehow Scotland relies on a handout from England, that they're subsidizing us, which of course nothing could be further from the truth. It's actually the other way around. It's the other way around. We generate electricity, right? Put it on the national grid, and guess where that electricity goes? We produce much more than we need. So where do you think it goes? We're exporting it. So that's just one particular thing. But we're not actually making any money out of it. They actually charge us a surcharge for using the national grid. So Scotland and the Highlands are being charged for putting their electricity on the national grid. So,
yeah. An important question, which has already been answered. Do we have Alba candidates listed in the May elections? And I know the answer is yes, but I'm sure you can expound on that
we have
with much more competence than I have.
We have 109 across Scotland. I believe it's just about every single. I haven't seen the whole list because I've been concentrating in Edinburgh. So in Edinburgh, we've got 7. I'm one of them. I'm standing in Sighthill Gorgie ward, which is where I've lived for more than 25 years. And in fact, I was brought up just in the next one, which is Castorpin. So I was brought up there. So I've been out campaigning, funny enough, since January in the freezing cold. I've now delivered, and I got a round of applause at the Alba conference. I have delivered of this 8,500 of these myself, and I've been bitten twice by 2 dogs just yesterday. Up until then, I've managed to avoid them. Little buggers sitting behind the letterbox, silent, no noise. I didn't know there was a dog.
They were just sitting there. They were just ready to pounce, man.
Yeah, the ones that make a noise, you've been alerted to them, But the ones that are silent, just waiting for something to come through a letterbox to bite you. Anyway, I've heard of others. No wonder postmen don't like dogs. Now I understand. But yes, so I think I'm really I've been excited because of what been happening in SSRG. I mean, even a year ago when it started, I wondered where this. I sort of wondered where SSRG was going to go, and I wondered.
Azulinho said that it's a pleasure to have spoken to you in Paisley and the rally again at Whiskey Joe's.
Whiskey Joe's, yes. Well, I don't know his name, but
it's Azulinho. If that, at least that's what appears on.
I'm not sure that's his name, but yeah, I did speak to a few people, and I wasn't drinking because I had to drive back from Paisley. But which I'd never been to Paisley before. It was quite nice. Although sat nav, here's a warning for you. Somebody gave me the postcode of where it was, and it took me to the crematorium, which was right next door, right enough, but up the hill. I ended up at someone's funeral, and I thought, this can't be it. This can't be where we're having it.
It's Hashbury Stumble. Remember your list candidates in order of preference in local elections. Some have 3 seats and some have 4. So
yeah. Most of the ones in Edinburgh have 4, and so I mean, I'm very lucky to have been one of the main campaigners in this seat for the SNP for the last 7 or 8 years. So I've done a lot of work here. So that's given me a lot, I think, an advantage. And it's been great to meet so many people. I mean, I've deliberately.
Just tell us a little bit about the experience. What's some in the feedback like?
I started.
What's the word on the street, so to speak?
The word's been. I have to say, the reaction's been very good, which I'm very pleased. There's a really good vibe. I have to say, and I don't want to bash the SNP. I was in there long enough, but their track record in Edinburgh is not good. The roads are in a terrible state. There's the tram. I mean, it's been awful. I don't know if they've done such a bad job with education. I think the issue is, of course, their budget is limited. So austerity came from 10 years of the Tories, thanks to the Lib Dems helping David Cameron into power. We had all the mess left from the Labour Party. It was the Labour Party that built an Edinburgh tram and wasted over £500 million over budget. I mean, you couldn't make this up. And we never really needed a tram. And we have an excellent bus service in Edinburgh, which, by the way, is over 50% owned by the council. So it just goes to show that publicly owned public transport can be run very successfully.
Oh, France is good evidence of that with their rail system and stuff like that. So anyway,
yeah. So I started out by going out and visiting parents at primary schools at closing time. So I've done, I think, nearly all the schools. I think I've got one more and another exit at another school. to go and visit. And I handed a little business card to all of them saying, I'm standing in the next election and I definitely want to support parents' rights. I believe local councils have been a bit high-handed in a number of things that they've done, and that parents don't really get listened to. And I think, frankly, parents know what their kids need. They know best, certainly better than most local councils do. So I want to see parents being consulted, and I want full informed consent before councils go around changing dramatically things that impact kids' education. I also have spoken, and it's been really great because I've physically been there and met so many of them and handed cards to many. I had one amazing encounter a couple of weeks ago, handed cards out, and this little girl comes back. She was about 6 years old with my card in her hand, which she'd got from my mum. She's a real character.
Did you sign it? Did she want you to?
No, signature? No, I'm not joking. She comes back with the card right in her hand. Now her mum is just maybe 50 feet along on the pavement, stopped with the pushchair, watching. She obviously knows what her daughter's like, and she comes back and she goes, "What's this all about?"
What are you doing running for? Running for office?
It was amazing. I said, "Oh, I'm standing for the council election to be a councillor." What's that? And I said, council, we run the schools and all that, and we repair the roads, and and we deal with social housing and stuff. Oh, are you going to be the president? And I says, no, I'm a local councillor. We run the school. Oh, so if you get elected, will we get new books? And I thought, yes, you bloody well will, if it's got anything to do with me. And I thought, what a smart cookie, about 6 years old. Anyway, and our mum was standing watching. She's whispered, "Oh, sorry." I'm sorry. No, not a problem. And I thought, wow. So she's clever enough at 6 years old to know what an election is. She knows what the president is. She understands, if you're going to be in charge of the school, can we get new books? So they obviously need new books. And then I've been to another school, and I was asking the parents. I always ask the parents, "What's the school like in your view? Is there any issues and blah blah? What could be improved?" I think schools have a very difficult job, and one of the bits at Stenhouse Primary School, they've been trying to get their play area resurfaced. It's really harsh, and when kids fall over on it, they're getting cut and injured, and it's clearly it needs some money spent on it. It's an old building, and it's not had any money spent on it. They've asked before, the council said there's no money. It'll have to come out of your school budget, which of course they can't do. So I would very much like to spearhead and get the community together, see if we can get some sponsorship together and find if we can find some money at the council and get that fixed. Yeah. I mean, the issue is a local councillor should care about the local community and want to see it improved. That's exactly what I want to do. And I'm sure that's what all the other Alba councillors want to do too. And sometimes you need fresh blood and some fresh ideas. And that is, I think, what we're going to bring into it.
Okay, it's about time to wrap up. So I just wanted to, for our viewers, just to give kind of a summary of what our view, or the SSRG view, is on the route to independence. We've our member Sarah Salyers has put forth a proposal regarding the claim of right and the Treaty of Union. Basically, say that the Treaty of the Claim of Right of 1689 was a prenuptial agreement for the Treaty of Union, and that gives it the authority to basically just withdraw from the Treaty of Union. How we do that that's what we got to figure out,
I think the main thing is main argument that she's uncovered is if they are infringing your basic legal rights in Scotland under the claim of right, and one of those rights is the right to protest, that is embedded in the claim of right. So this new piece of legislation, and the fact that Nicola Sturgeon's government has decided that they want to give the police the powers to maybe arrest you and charge you and decide whether or not you should be allowed to protest outside Holyrood. Well, that's a clear breach of the claim of right. And therefore, that means the Westminster government is no longer legitimate, and Scotland could, if it decides to, decide to walk away and terminate the treaty. I mean, before I go, just to let you know, thanks to Sarah, must thank Sarah, by the way, we have had another 20 to 30 of them ordered. Every time I get
copies of the Treaty of Union. And where can our viewers get a hold of one?
They can there's a button on our website. So if you go on our website, you click on that.
Yes, Scottish Sovereignty Research Group.org.
Yeah, I know somebody did tell me we've got the longest domain name in history.
It's right there on the screen. So
we tried to get SSRG, but sadly, there's companies that have got that already, and it wasn't my idea. So I blame John for that. That was his idea. He wanted to call us Scottish Sovereignty Research Group. It's his fault.
Well, we all agreed to it, but it is long on a website. That's true.
Yeah, well, that's why you just want the link. You can click on the link. But yeah, that's about another 20 to 30 copies just in the last 2 days gone out. And every time I get to the post office, the blooming phone pings again. I can hear it. The little cash register signs coming. I thought, oh God, not more of them. Well, they'll have to go out tomorrow. But this is already in addition to the several hundred that went out before. You know, when we first published it. So people need to know their rights. They need to understand their history. And so I think All Under One Banner is doing a great job with the marches. I think we should all get behind that. I think every group should do that. And it's good to see, even at the Paisley thing that I was at, which again was All Under One Banner, we had people from the SNP making speeches. I was there on behalf of Alba. And I have to say, that's the way it needs to continue.
Absolutely. No question about it. Okay. All right. Well, unless there's anything you want to add, we can say goodbye to our faithful listeners or viewers. And is there anything you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
I think if you haven't already joined our website, you should register on it, because then you can download the documents, the videos with describing the 6 routes to independence. They'll be there some point in the future, and you'll be able to watch them via the website as well. And then get involved.
Any idea when that might come out?
I don't know, because I'm in full campaign mode, so I'm busy every day. So sometime after the 5th of May, I hope.
Well, probably. Okay.
Which sounds far away. It's not. It's 6 weeks away. It's
because we did want to have that done possibly before the first road show, which explains the 6 different routes to Indy. So
I know.
Anyway, we'll save that till after.
I need to find some spare time, because I did offer to do the voiceover for
exactly,
and then hand it to someone else. But and I've got the scripts. They're here. Jeff sent them to me. I think the first thing that's going to go up there will be Sarah's speech. If you haven't seen it, I've downloaded it all. We'll edit it. We'll put a bumper for SSRG on it. And we'll
probably, if you do Sarah Salyers, Salyers, Alba Conference, I've seen it on Twitter. It's about 7 minutes, but well worth it.
I know, she stole the show. Yeah. It was a very powerful speech, and very well describes exactly what claim of right is all about, and how we can be independent. We've got a written constitution. And I think it probably comes as quite a shock to many senior politicians that such a thing exists.
Yeah. And so, and we will, the SSRG will be doing a series of road shows starting in the middle of, next month in April. We'll have more information about that. We've got the first 3 organized. The first one would be on the different routes to independence. Hopefully you can get the video out. We can maybe put it later if need be. And then the second one will be on the Constitution. And then the third one will be on rights in independent Scotland, and how it would be different from under the UK. So anyway, so again, we'll have more. The SSRG will have more information on that soon. Everybody's really busy, especially David, trying to get elected. But thank you everybody for watching, and David, thanks again for being with us.
Thanks
Sure.
for inviting me, Mark.
Sure, of course.